close to midnight or Monday morning in Paris, France, where Emmanuel Macron, the Rothschild banker, the establishment frontman, pushed by the corporate press in France, pushed by the corporate press here in the United States as well, endorsed by Barack Obama, is projected to have won by a massive landslide, with exit polls and polls showing 65% to 35% gap in the runoff election, wider than the 20% or so percentage points the pre-election surveys had pointed to. Many of the polls, scientific, showed Marie Le Pen ahead, despite the fact that they were adding more points on, just like they did for Hillary Clinton in the 2016 election. Remember, on average, they added about 15 points. CNN added 35 points to some of their telephone polls. I don't know what's really happened here. Paul Watson has tweeted videos out of France showing the ballots coming in by the thousands with no Marie Le Pen marked, all pre-marked for this gentleman, Emmanuel Macron. I'll tell you this, either the French have made good on their stereotype of running up the white flag to occupation, to the German domination of the EU, or this is one of the biggest cases of election fraud in history. It's too early to tell right now, but I'll tell you this, they are announcing it for Macron. Macron is supposedly the winner here. There's been such a hoax that he's anti-establishment, that he's a populist and came from nowhere, when his whole life is a beard. His whole life is not what it seems now that the hacked emails have come out. And the media keeps claiming the Russians are the ones that don't want him elected. No, it's called nationalist across the world. American bloggers are being sued by the French government, saying that you're not allowed to criticize what we're doing domestically. You work for the Russians. Well, I guess the Russians weren't all powerful, were they? It was U.S. intelligence agencies leaked the information to WikiLeaks, ladies and gentlemen. That's all come out. It was the intelligence agencies in France that were actually fighting against the other 12 candidates and Emmanuel Macron. But they've been overpowered by the globalists. It was the police bucking the police unions that were ordering them to vote for Emmanuel Macron. Because these agencies aren't perfect, but they're not trying to commit suicide over the nation states, at least in the mid-ranks and the lower ranks. At the top, we've got globalist operators like Brennan, who's an admitted Wahhabist, could convert to Islam, telling our president, Donald John Trump, you better watch your mouth. 2 days before Trump even got in office, he was shocked when Trump fired him. We'll break down the numbers here, but I want to air a video as well in closing in a few minutes with Paul Watson, who put out a video on Friday, The Truth About Macron, just listing some of the French amazing ways that the entire corporate press has force-fed this guy to people. But I tweeted today another person's photos from France, comparing it to They Live, the 1980s film with Rowdy Piper, where he put the sunglasses on, and you can see the underlying propaganda on the billboards, on the newsstands, and the overall driving chant, sleep, 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 because they live while we sleep. And it shows the newsstands in Paris with nothing but Emmanuel Macron and no Marie Le Pen. We'll show people a full screen of that image if we can, because this illustrates whether this was the fraud and the takeover of the election and a stolen election, or whether this was a real landslide against the nationalist, the far-right candidate who was just really kind of a mainline Ron Paul type person. This shows the victory of the establishment, because if they stole it, it's a brazen, high-noon fraud in front of God and the rest of the world. But if they didn't steal it, it's a victory of mind control, and shows that the French buy into fashion and trendiness and being part of the establishment and going along with the herd worse than North Koreans, because North Koreans don't have a right to even vote. They've been 3 generations under tyranny, poor things. You have had some history. You've had some basic history of freedom as well. But let's look at the French. The Franks, the Gauls, as the Romans called them, were conquered over 1,000 years ago by the Norman, by the Vikings. And a new hardy breed was created from the Vikings and the Gaul stock. Then they had a whole bunch of wars with the Spanish and the Portuguese and the Dutch and the Germans, the Germanic tribes, and of course with the Britons, the Britties, with the Saxons. And they conquered the Saxons, the Normans, 1100, William the Conqueror. And they lost about half their military-aged men in 2 different wars that Napoleon Bonaparte launched, conquering much of the Western world. But going where dictators go to fail, he finally failed in Russia before reconstituting his armies yet again and being defeated by Lord Wellington at the Battle of Waterloo. But I digress with history. That's a conspiracy theory to the general public. The general public doesn't know a fact or know an issue. The media just says, that's a conspiracy theory that he says 2 + 2 = 4. Or it's a conspiracy theory that Obamacare was written to rip you and your family off. They just tell you, don't worry about intellectuals and those that are informed, especially if they have Texas accents. Nothing good ever came out of Texas. They ride horses in Texas and don't even wipe their butts. Just call them conspiracy theorists, and then you don't have to be embarrassed that you're uninformed. You can just feel intellectual. So this is either a victory by massive election fraud when the polls showed her dead heat, behind, or ahead, but it was all very close, and even spun polls that were oversampling for Macron. She won in this big 13-person runoff against him. She was a close second in the runoff, and now there's been a giant whopping sound defeat. The French actually sold out, the French high command sold out the German high command 2 years before Hitler ever invaded France. That's why the French just laid down at the Maginot Line, and then at Dunkirk, the British Expeditionary Force, 400,000 men had to evacuate. It's coming out in the big film soon, Hollywood. It's not that the French are even wimps, it's that they've been captured by propaganda, and some of the best propaganda around the last 800 years or so. And so, again, it was being projected he would be the president. But now AP, the folks that announce our presidents, says Emmanuel Macron becomes France's youngest president. And so they've got the man endorsed by Barack Obama, who endorsed not leaving the unelected euro, who attacked Brexit last year. We called it the kiss of death. A lot of Brits said they didn't like being lectured by a foreigner. But Obama felt like this was a safe bet for Macron, the protege of Hollande. And this is why I think it may be election fraud. Or maybe the French were going to go a little bit for him, because the polls showed that could have been the case. Some he was ahead, some he was behind, some he was dead heat. But they wanted to just be sure in having a sounding defeat of Marine Le Pen. Because the globalists are so scared of nationalism with Trump. Say what you want about Trump. He's bringing the power back to America. He's really making decisions as our president. He's really turning the jobs back on. He's not selling out our interest anymore. That defeat, Brexit, Iceland, what they did, what's happening in Italy, saying no to EU expansion, what's happening all over the world. Brazil's trying to pull out of globalism. It's just modern colonialism, modern corporatism. They're pulling out everywhere. So the globalists are panicking. They don't know what to do. So they rig the election. A lot of evidence shows they did. They rigged the polls. They have all these ballots being sent out. They don't even have Marie Le Pen's name on them. That's been documented. We just showed you that. And Hollande said, the outgoing socialist, I'm making it a national security issue 6 months ago to defeat Marie Le Pen. They tried to have her arrested. They indicted her for saying Islam's the greatest threat to France since Nazism. That's totally true. And you have globalist traitors that have opened the door to radical Islam, brought it in, they've been bought off by it. Islamists burning down large parts of cities every night, raping, killing. And Hollande says, reject her, because she's open, because she wants freedom. She wants religious freedom. She doesn't want to bring the viper into her breast. The 1 million+ Islamic men that have been brought in just the last 3 years. Germany's brought in over 3 million. So Marie Le Pen properly said last week, France will be ruled by a woman. France will be run by a woman, whether it's me, Marie Le Pen, or whether it's Angela Merkel, because that's true. The EU is run by the German government that perches on top the poor German people as well. But after World War II and 22 million Germans dying, or 21 million, and after all the other wars with France, they have learned to lay down, and only the people that lay down are left in France, in Germany, some could argue. Or it's massive election fraud. I'll be on the radio in exactly 58 minutes. Infowars.com/show. 200 plus affiliates across the country. Just Google if Alex